Atris is one of the most consequential Jedi of the Old Republic era, yet her true impact remains buried beneath the ruins that she helped to create. Few Jedi have ever left scars as deep or as far-reaching as hers. Scars that stretch to the aftermath of Exar Kun and Keldroma, through the Mandalorian Wars, and all the way into the age of Anakin Skywalker. Her story begins as a reformer, a scholar desperate to protect the Jedi from repeating their oldest sins. She rose to the High Council by promising stability at a time when the Order feared another Exar Kun. But in trying to prevent the next great fall, Atris quietly became the architect of one. She would lie to her fellow Jedi in the moment of greatest vulnerability. She would call a secret gathering that would lead to the deaths of nearly every surviving member of the Jedi Civil War. She would isolate herself in a hidden academy, surrounding her chambers with Sith holocrons while insisting that she alone remain pure. And through her influence, the Jedi Code would harden into the strict, brittle doctrine that centuries later would break Anakin Skywalker. What makes Atris terrifying is that she never believed herself fallen. Her destruction of the Jedi in her time and long after was unintentional, born from certainty rather than from malice. She thought she was saving the Jedi. Instead, she doomed them. This is the chronicle of Atris, the Jedi Master whose fear reshaped the Jedi Code, whose deception helped trigger the First Jedi Purge, and whose legacy quietly bled into the downfall of the Republic itself. A white-robed shadow hiding a history darker than many Sith. Atris first emerged in a moment when the Jedi Order was shattered, directionless, and terrified of repeating its own histories. The Great Sith War had ended only recently, leaving behind ruins that stretched from Ossus to Coruscant. The galaxy still whispered the names of Exar Kun and Keldroma with fear. And within the Jedi, there was a lingering sense, unspoken, but deeply felt, that something in the Jedi had been fundamentally flawed. As a young historian, Atris devoted herself to understanding why so many Jedi had fallen during this time. She studied the records of the Great Schism, the mistakes that allowed Exar to rise, the permission training that let Keldroma slip into the darkness. And in those archives, Atris found her mission. She believed the Jedi needed structure, discipline, boundaries that had not existed in the era before. Clear rules that removed chaos, attachment, and dangerous independence from the lives of Jedi students. Atris raised questions few others dared to. Why were Padawans taken so late? Why were masters allowed so many apprentices? Why had the Jedi become flexible to the point of instability? Her proposals were strict, severe, and uncompromising. And to an order still reeling from betrayal, they sounded like salvation. Atris gained influence rapidly. She became a guardian of doctrine, a voice arguing for tighter control over training, emotions, and personal bonds. Jedi Masters who had once doubted themselves began turning to her vision of a more restrained order, one immune to the temptations that had destroyed half their number by this time. In this era, Atris was elevated to the rank of the High Council. Not because she was the most powerful, not because she was the wisest, but because she represented something the Order desperately wanted and thought that they needed. An illusion that they could prevent another Exar Kun simply by tightening their grip. Her robes were white, symbolizing purity and clarity. Her ideals were rigid, shaped by fear as much as it was wisdom. And though no one realized it then, Atris's ascent marked the beginning of a new era for the Jedi, one that would echo through centuries of doctrine. An era where restraint became suppression, discipline became rigidity, and fear of the dark side slowly reshaped the Order into something fragile. She did not intend to change the Jedi into a brittle institution. She believed that she was protecting them, but her rise laid the foundation for the greatest failures yet to come. What's fascinating about Atris is that she wasn't entirely wrong. The Jedi Order of her lifetime stood in the long shadow of three disasters, three betrayals so devastating that they seemed to define the entire age. First came Keldroma, the Jedi Knight who fell to Sithhood and led armies against his own order, dragging countless worlds into fire. His downfall was not just a tragedy, it was a revelation that even the brightest among them could collapse under the weight of their conviction. Then came Exar Kun, perhaps the most brilliant Jedi in the entire age, a man whose ambitions transformed into something far more catastrophic. Exar believed the Jedi teachings were incomplete, and like so many who dared to question them, he found his answers in forbidden places. His descent into darkness and the mass Jedi slaughter he orchestrated left the Order traumatized. Exar was everything that Atris feared a Jedi could become: charismatic, brilliant, and uncontained. But the final blow came not long after, from someone the Order had trusted even more. When Revan and Malak turned on the Republic after the Mandalorian Wars, their fall was unlike Ulic's or Exar's. It was not the wars of past, it was the war of the present. And Malak and Revan were attempting to reshape the entire galaxy under a new Sith rule. To Atris, this pattern was unmistakable. 3 major Jedi betrayals in less than half a century. 3 collapses driven by passion, conviction, and independence. Catastrophes born from Jedi who believed that they saw a clearer path than the Council did. She believed the flaw was not in the individuals, it was in the Jedi Order. If Exar had been restrained more tightly, if Ulic had been trained with greater discipline, if Revan had been denied the freedom to act on his instinct, Atris convinced herself that none of these tragedies could have unfolded, and so her worldview hardened. She saw emotion as a doorway to corruption. She saw attachment as a weapon waiting to be turned against the Order. But worst of all, she saw independent judgment as a threat, not as a strength. The climate of fear, a fear the Jedi never admitted that they had, became the soil in which Atris's doctrine grew. Her suggestions for stricter training, earlier apprenticeships, and emotional detachment no longer sounded extreme. They sounded safe, and even necessary. The Jedi embraced many of her ideals, and those ideals would echo long after Atris had fallen into darkness herself. They would echo through the Jedi of the High Republic, they would echo through the Council of the Clone Wars, and they would echo through the training of the young Anakin Skywalker. For Atris, the lessons of the Sith before her were warnings that the Jedi must tighten their grip, but the truth, unbeknownst to her, is that this tightening would eventually suffocate the Order from within. These are poor decisions for the Jedi Order, but they were still being made by the Jedi. Atris at this point had not been corrupted, but that moment of corruption would soon arrive. Atris's fall did not begin with Sith holocrons or secret academies. It began with a Jedi, Meetra Surik, and the wound that she left on Atris's faith. Surik had been everything Atris admired. She was disciplined, principled, and loyal to the Jedi Code. She represented the version of the Jedi Atris wanted the entire Order to become. But when the Mandalorian Wars erupted and the Council hesitated, Meetra Surik answered Revan's call and went to war. For Atris, this wasn't merely disobedience, it was betrayal, and it was a deeply personal one. It confirmed every fear Atris held about Jedi independence. It proved to her that even the most trusted Jedi could fall into the same patterns of Exar and Ulic, acting out of a conviction and an emotion, a compassion rather than obedience. And then came Malachor V. Meetra returned a broken figure, a wound in the Force. Atris was the first to condemn her. She pushed for her exile, believing her compassion had led to atrocity and that the Order must purge anyone who risked repeating the failures of the past. Atris kept Surik's lightsaber as a symbol, not of remembrance, but what she believed needed to be eliminated from the Jedi and its doctrine. But while she obsessed over Surik's fall, another crisis consumed the stars. Across the Republic, the Jedi were vanishing, entire groups disappearing without a trace. Even the High Council could not determine what was killing them, so Atris made a decision that would define her legacy. She secretly called a Jedi conclave on the Miraluka world of Katarr, inviting many of the most powerful surviving Jedi to converge there. But she did not mention to them the truth. She had leaked the meeting's location in order to draw out whatever had been hunting them. She believed that if she could lure the threat into one location, the Jedi there could be powerful enough to defeat it. She believed this was a necessary sacrifice. She believed her deception was justified. But Atris did not attend the conclave herself. When Darth Nihilus arrived, the result was annihilation. Every Jedi on Katarr died. Every Miraluka died. The surface of the planet became a void, a scar in the Force so profound it echoed years after the attack. But Atris survived by her choice. And though she never intended to kill Jedi, the truth is unavoidable. Atris was responsible for the destruction of nearly what remained of the Jedi Order after the Civil War. Her fear of another Revan, her obsession with doctrinal purity, her willingness to manipulate the Jedi in secret all converged into one of the greatest disasters in their history. The betrayal she felt from Meetra had driven her to believe that only Atris could reshape the Jedi. Katarr proved how far she was willing to go to make that future a reality. It is here, not in darkness, But in exile, the Atris truly begins her transformation into one of the most dangerous Jedi ever. Of all of the choices Atris made, none is more revealing or more damning than her absence from Katarr. On the surface, her reasoning can be justified as strategic. She claimed the Jedi gathered there that were strong enough to confront whatever threat was stalking the Order. She argued that someone had to remain behind to preserve what remained of the archives, to rebuild if the worst ever occurred. To Atris, this sounded rational, necessary, maybe even noble. But the truth behind that decision exposes the core of Atris's fall. Atris did not go to Katarr because she believed she was too important to risk. She saw herself as the guardian of the future of the Jedi, the one who would reshape the doctrine and prevent another Revan or Exar. In her mind, the Jedi at Katarr were defenders, but she was the architect. Yet there was another truth that she would never say aloud. Atris feared what she had set in motion. She did not understand the nature of the Force hunting the Jedi, only that it struck when they gathered. She did not know its power, only that it was unlike anything the Order had ever faced. And when confronted with the prospect of standing alongside the Jedi whose death she had engineered, Atris hesitated. She chose survival. She chose distance. She chose to let others bear the cost of her plan. In this moment, Atris crossed a line she would never admit. She placed her ideology above the lives of her fellow Jedi. When the surface of Katarr fell silent, when the Mira Luca were gone, and when the Order lay in ruins, Atris did not step forward to claim responsibility. She retreated into secrecy, into the Polar Academy that she built to hide her intentions, and into the certainty that the Jedi could only be saved if she rebuilt them her own way. Her absence at Katarr is not just cowardice in a traditional sense, it is the deeper kind, the refusal to confront one's own fault. Atris believed she was safeguarding the Jedi, but her decision to stay away ensured that none of them survived. In the ruins of Katarr, a new truth formed. Atris had not prevented another fall of the Jedi, she had caused one. But then she vanished. She withdrew from the ruins of the Jedi and retreated to a place no one would think to look. A forgotten irrigation complex buried beneath the polar ice of Telos 4. There, in silence and in secrecy, she began constructing her Jedi Order. The Telos Academy wasn't a temple, it was a vault. A vault for artifacts, records, and for every surviving scrap of Jedi knowledge that Atris could recover. But her obsession with understanding the Sith, with identifying every flaw that the Jedi ever had, would lead her astray and would push her into dangerous territory. In order to study the enemy, she began collecting Sith holocrons. At first, she justified it as simple research. Understanding the Sith, she said, was the key to preventing future Jedi falls. But the holocrons spoke with the voices the Jedi archives had long buried. And Atris, isolated and convinced of her own moral purity, believed that she could resist them. The holocrons did not seduce her in a traditional way. They did not offer power or glory or dominion. They offered confirmation, echoes of her fears, of her own rigidity, her belief that strength came from discipline and control. While Atris told herself she was studying the Sith to fight them, she was slowly adopting their methods. She began to see the strengths in militaristic training, emotional suppression, and a willingness to impose order by force rather than by persuasion. But perhaps the most revealing choice she made was the company that she kept. Atris surrounded herself with the Ichani handmaidens, warrior scholars trained from birth to resist force manipulation. She claimed she needed them as guardians, individuals who could subdue dangerous Jedi without succumbing to their influence. But the truth is far more troubling. Atris chose them because they could not sense the dark side emanating from her chambers. They could not feel the corruption slowly rising around the holocrons. They could not perceive the changes in her. They were by design blind to her fall, and Atris relied on that blindness. In her mind, she remained the last true Jedi, the keeper of the code, the guardian of the ancient teachings, the single pure voice left in the galaxy where the Order had collapsed under its own failures and the failures of other Jedi weaker than her. But in truth, she had already crossed into a space no Jedi should ever walk. Not the path of a Sith, but a path of someone who believed that they could rebuild the Jedi by discarding the very compassion, the humility that defined them as servants. The Polar Academy was not a sanctuary, it was a crucible, a place where Atris reforged the Jedi in her own image, guided not by the light or the dark side, but by fear disguised as clarity. And every day she meditated among the holocrons, convinced she was resisting them, she fell a little deeper. Their voices grew ever softer and sweeter in her ear. Oh, what a quiet thing it is to fall. In the silence of Telos and its academy, Atris believed herself untouchable. She had the archives, and she was certain. She knew that she was the Jedi's evolution. But Atris had forgotten the one person who understood her better than she understood herself. And that person was Kreia. When the Jedi Council fell on Dantooine, cut down by the very powers they once feared, Kreia's identity as Darth Traya resurfaced, reclaimed, renewed. She turned her gaze to Telos, not for vengeance, but out of inevitability. Atris had walked a path that Kreia knew well, and she knew exactly where it would end. Kreia slipped into the Polar Academy with ease. The handmaidens blind to the Force never sensed her presence at all. Atris, buried in her delusion of purity, never realized the darkness she feared most was already standing in her sanctum. The confrontation between them was not a duel, it was a dismantling. Kreia did not need a blade. All she needed was truth. Kreia told Atris what the handmaidens could not, that her chambers reeked of the dark side, that the holocron she studied had shaped her, that her obsession with purity was indistinguishable from the Sith's hunger for control and power. Atris denied it, clinging to the same rigid certainty that had guided every disastrous choice that she had made. But Kreia pressed harder. She forced Atris to confront Katarr, the lie she told to the Jedi, the massacre she caused, the responsibility that she had evaded. She forced her to face the truth that the order she claimed to protect had already been destroyed by her own hand. And at last, Atris shattered. It was the kind of collapse only Kreia could orchestrate. The unmaking of a worldview, the unraveling of a belief system built on fear, masquerading as discipline. Atris realized that she had become the mirror of everything she despised. Worst of all, this was not a chosen descent. It was an accidental collapse born from denial and self-righteousness. Kreia left her alive, only because she no longer mattered. She was no longer a threat, a leader, and she was no longer a voice capable of reshaping the fate of any Jedi. She was a broken figure in white, left behind in the ice, waiting for the exile to finish what Kreia had begun. She wanted to rebuild the Jedi in her image, but she was left to confront the truth that she had done more to destroy the Jedi than many Sith Lords ever could. Atris remained alone in the cold halls of the Polar Academy. When Mitra Surik arrived, Atris no longer carried the authority of a council member or the conviction of a reformer. She carried only the consequences of every choice that she had made. The confrontation between them was not the clash that Atris had once prepared for. There was no triumphant speech of judgment, no vindication, no moral high ground left to stand on. Mitra defeated her easily, not out of dominance, but because Atris no longer had anything left to fight for. In the end, Atris finally spoke the words she had denied for years. She admitted that she had fallen to the dark side. She admitted that she was blinded by fear. She admitted that she had become the thing that she accused others of being. But her confession came too late to undo the damage that she had done. Atris surrendered her identity as a Jedi Master. She surrendered her claim to purity. She surrendered her very title as a Jedi. The final fate of Atris is never fully revealed. The records end with her contained within the Academy, waiting to be tried by the new Jedi that will rise up. The doctrines that she had championed, such as emotional suppression, early separation from family, rigid training, and the fear of attachment, they all became embedded in the Jedi Order. Her worldview, forged in terror of Exar Kun that was hardened by Revan, would echo through centuries of Jedi policy. In a distant age, those same doctrines would break Anakin. Atris's influence endures not because she sought power, but because she redefined what the Jedi believed would keep them safe. Because of her fear, the very veins of the Jedi Order were calcifying into a brittle institution, one unable to adapt, and more importantly, one unable to empathize. Atris never wanted to be a villain. She never intended to harm the Jedi, but her impact on the Order for the worst passes nearly every Sith Lord in Legends continuity. But in my opinion, what makes Atris one of the most complex characters and one of the most fascinating is she didn't destroy the Jedi with a blade or an army. She weakened them with ideas. Ideas that would shape their collapse. One that would leave the galaxy waiting for someone like Grandmaster Luke Skywalker to rebuild what she had broken. But with all of that said, I have a very complex question for you. Was Atris a villain, or was she simply the inevitable product of a Jedi Order that was already doomed? Let me know what you think in the comments down below, my friends. And as always, may the Force be with you wherever your journey takes you next. Have a great day.